Have you ever come across code that seems to do the same thing twice? It can be confusing, right? Today, we're diving into a common coding question. Does catching and rethrowing the exact same exception actually mean anything? I totally get it. You might have seen code that catches an exception only to throw it again without any changes. It raises a lot of questions. You're not alone in wondering if this practice is useful or just clutter. Here's the specific situation we're looking at. A user recently asked about a piece of code that throws and catches the same exception. They wanted to know if this approach has any real impact on behavior, performance, or readability. Sound familiar? Let's explore this together. So what's the deal with catching and rethrowing exceptions? In many cases, it seems redundant. However, understanding the context and purpose behind this practice can shed light on its potential benefits. And stick around. By the end of this video, you'll have a clearer understanding of when this practice might be useful and when it's just unnecessary noise in your code. To understand the implications of catching and rethrowing the same exception, the user should first consider the purpose of exception handling. It is primarily used to manage errors and maintain the flow of the program. In the first code example, the user catches the exception and immediately rethrows it. This does not change the exception's state or provide additional context. Therefore, it may seem redundant. However, there are scenarios where catching an exception can be useful. For instance, the user might want to log the exception or perform some cleanup before rethrowing it. This adds value to the exception handling process. In contrast, the second code example does not catch the exception at all. This approach is cleaner and allows the exception to propagate naturally, which can be beneficial for debugging. In conclusion, while catching and rethrowing the same exception may not provide immediate benefits, it can be useful in specific contexts. The user should evaluate their needs and decide the best approach for their code. Now let's break down the implications. Catching and rethrowing can be beneficial if you need to perform additional actions, like logging the error or transforming the exception into a different type. Otherwise, it may just add unnecessary complexity. Fun fact: the practice of exception handling in programming is similar to how we handle mistakes in life. Sometimes we need to pause, reflect, and then decide how to move forward, just like in coding. Now let's look at the answers provided by other users. This user points out that catching and rethrowing the same exception may not be necessary. They suggest that if you see this in commercial code, it might be left over from previous logic. However, there is a valid use case for this approach. It can prevent an exception from being caught by a more general catch clause. For example, if you want to handle all exceptions except for a specific one, you can catch that specific exception and rethrow it, allowing other exceptions to be handled separately. Here's a pro tip: always consider the context of your code. If catching and rethrowing serves a purpose, go for it. If not, simplify your code for better readability and performance. Understanding the nuances of exception handling can make you a better programmer. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe for more coding tips and tricks.